t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as fait manquer, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hello there and welcome to Brussels, My Love, Euronews' weekly political chat show about the good and bad of EU policymaking. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thanks for watching. Coming up on the show, move over decarbonisation. The new buzzword around Brussels is deregulation. This week, the European Commission, known for its obsession with bureaucracy, promised an unprecedented reduction of red tape. The new plan, that aspires to simplify life for all those doing business in the EU, is music to the ears of Europe's car industry, struggling for survival. We ask if it can really do the trick. And good news for the European economy. Inflation is down and growth is up. Economists insist there's light at the end of the tunnel. So why are we all so broke? The price of a coffee or a beer has spiked out of control in most European cities lately, and most young people cannot afford to buy a house. With economic concerns the main woe for us, and 1 in 2 of us spending 50% less on groceries, we're asking what is in store for our pockets this year in 2025. Let's bring in our panel this weekend. Farg Volkmann, a policy analyst with the European Policy Centre. Maria João Rodrigues, president of the Foundation for European Progressive Studies, also known as FEPS. And Conor Allen, corporate lobbyist here in Brussels. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming and for joining us. But as usual, before we bring in your thoughts and views, let's just hear why 2025 has started very, very badly for Europe's car sector.
A spectre is haunting Germany, the spectre of the country's all-important car industry going bust, and iconic Volkswagen, Mercedes and BMW vehicles being displayed in museums rather than in the streets of global markets. 2024 was the industry's annus horribilis, as shrinking sales and mass layoffs saw ripple effects among suppliers from Belgium to Hungary. If Germany tanks, the rest of Europe's car industry goes with it. So much for the spectre. But the clock is ticking for real. From sustainability challenges to shifting consumer demand, 2025 will be a decisive year for the industry's efforts to catch up. And then this. Chinese electric vehicles are predicted to almost triple their market share in the EU by 2027. Can Europe still turn on the turbo?
So Conor Allen, let's start with you. As you are familiar with the sector, do you think Europe's car sector can be saved?
Can be saved, but it needs a lot of action, and it needs a lot of action very quickly. So the key point of the issue is the 2035 internal combustion engine ban, because there is no consumer demand for electric vehicles at the moment, but what we have is the European Commission mandating that from 2035 onwards, it's only electric vehicles that will be sold. That's squeezed these car companies. They don't know what to do. They can't manufacture. They're ignoring the market, basically. And if you ignore the market,
off the table?
Absolutely, 100%.
And that's, of course, what the EPP want. That is the centre-right European People's Party, the party of Ursula von der Leyen, who, the Commission President, they're putting a lot of pressure on her. But then we're rolling back on the promises that we made.
We are. And, of course, to many minds, electric vehicles are the cars of the future. And there's really sort of a situation of the egg and the hen here. How do you solve this? Because, you need to roll out electric vehicles, but then you need the infrastructure to roll them out. You need purchasing subsidies to get people to buy them.
And I don't think it's as simple as just blaming one specific EU regulation. I mean, it's also competition from China that means that our car industry is in the dire situation that it is.
Look, I think this is the time to have an industrial plan to relaunch the car industry in Europe. Such an important industry. And I think we should come with a very clear goal, which is to produce affordable electric vehicles for the middle class in Europe. Because for the time being, car industry in Europe was focusing on the high end of the market. This is not working. We really need to focus on the large majority of population. And this is exactly the Chinese have done. And I think this is possible for Europe if we can come with a real industrial plan, with more innovation on batteries, on chips, on providing the infrastructure to support these new kind
That's
of
the
cars.
problem, because if you talk to consumers all across Europe, they'll say we're not buying electric cars now for the reason that we can't charge it, and also because the price. It's just really
Yes, exactly.
expensive. We can't
But
afford it.
these are the 2 points to be tackled by the plan. And this is possible.
But Norway, your home country, is reaching all the headlines when it comes to electric vehicles. With 9 in 10, I understand, cars on the road in Norway being electric. What tips have you got for the rest of us?
Really, charging infrastructure is a key point here. You can basically drive your car wherever in Norway, which is a very large country with a sparsely populated area, but you could still charge your car with superchargers wherever you go. There are also purchasing subsidies for consumers, and you can ride your e-car in the bus lane. You can have a free access to ferries. There are a lot of different incentives you could use.
Subsidies. That's a word that you don't like.
No, absolutely not. And if we look at the case of Norway, where do these subsidies come from? It's from oil extraction in the North Sea. So, I mean, if we're going to say that these electric vehicles can be rolled out across the market without paying attention to the environment, well, why not let the Chinese products in? Why we put huge tariffs on Chinese vehicles? Why are we scared of competition? The thing that will fix the European car industry is pressure and pressure from China that will force them to innovate and force them to up their game, and they haven't done that so far.
I think it's about saving the crown jewel of our industry, which is the cars. You wanted to add a point there?
Yeah, just to add, I don't disagree. Like, we are talking about climate change here. We need huge changes in how we move around and how we do it. It does make sense to get a lot of cheap Chinese cars in, but as you say, there are a huge amount of jobs on the line here. And how do you get people on board if everybody can drive e-cars but don't have jobs?
Well, that is indeed the question as well. For the Volkswagen, for example, it's shutting down 3 factories in Germany, laying off thousands of workers this year, saying it's in a very serious situation with profits dropping. BMW, Mercedes as well, feeling the effects of the reduction in profit margins because of China. So it's not at stake here.
but the solution is not just to delay the transition to an EV car. Should, on the contrary, to move faster with reskilling workers and on producing the kind of cars which are affordable for the middle class. The tariffs are there to protect car makers in Europe while the transition takes place. But this is not the real solution. The real solution is an industrial plan. And look, I was in China in December, in Beijing. Half of the traffic is EVs. We can see by the green plates there. And the sky is blue again in Beijing, which was not the case. So this is quite an achievement. It's not a threat. This is an achievement. But we can do the same in Europe. We have the technology. We have the capacity, if you want. And the upcoming competitiveness compass, from my viewpoint, is a great opportunity.
But just on that, because I want to say that the Commission's door is also open to listening to the sector. We see this week on Thursday, the Commission triggered this so-called social dialogue with the industry. What can that actually change?
Well, I mean, I'm happy to see the Commission's listening to us, because I lobbied the Commission over 5 years, and every time I was turned away and they didn't listen to us. And every prediction we made has now come true. But in fact, what can the Commission do? And Maria, you alluded to this. I think the state needs to take a step back here, because the state has got us into this mess. What we actually need to do is take a step back. These are the biggest and most prestigious car manufacturers in the world. And are we saying that they can't compete on their own ends? We need to make sure that they're responsive to the consumer and responsive to the free market, and not responsive to government subsidies or begging for tariffs or whatever state aid they
But
can
I'm
get.
sorry, what do you mean by a setback? What do you mean by this? Is giving up producing EVs in Europe?
Let them compete, let them fight, Maria.
Yeah, of course.
Let's have
that's
Volkswagen
my
competing with Great Wall and,
that's my point. We have the competition capacity regarding the Chinese if you want. If you move faster, we can have an affordable EV for the middle class. This should be our goal. This is possible.
I agree.
And you should not give up of this.
No, I agree totally, but let's not set abstract or arbitrary targets. Let the free market and let consumer demand guide this, and not targets set by
But
the state.
consumers will come if you have affordable cars, and if you have the charging infrastructure.
And
These are the two conditions.
Competition.
But we're still a long way from that. Have you any faith in this social dialogue, or is it too late to talk?
I think it's starting to be too late, and we have to face that we have also been outcompeted by the Chinese. They are cheaper, but they are also more technologically advanced. They are just preferred by a lot of consumers. So we have to face that Europe may not be up to the task, or European producers at the moment, to compete with the Chinese companies. And they have done so not using only market signals. They have also used large-scale subsidies from the state, indirect.
They had industrial policy. Europe for long was hesitating on having industrial policy. Now there is the recognition that we need to have industrial policy. Draghi report is about this. The competitive compass should be about this. Finally, we recognize that we need to have active industrial policy.
And does the industry need to rethink as well how they make money? I mean, if you look at, for example, here in Brussels, the Audi plant, it will close down on the 28th of February, a nail in the coffin, of course, for the sector, but some contemplating whether they should start manufacturing tractors, for example.
Yeah, but let me add, there is now perhaps an opportunity coming from what is happening in the United States, because the fact that President Trump announced that he wants somehow to give up of the the American Green Deal.
The inflation.
And you saw what he said during the inauguration speech. He said you can buy whatever the car you want. So, from my viewpoint, this can open an opportunity for European car makers to really become competitive on EVs, because this is more market for us.
Would you agree with that?
In some ways I do. I think there is an opportunity there from what's happening in America, but I'll just very quickly like to touch on the point you made about changing the way you make money in the car industry, because here again European regulation is throttling things. If you look at BMW, for example, they sell digital services now. You have to buy a subscription to heat your seats. Or, wouldn't it be great if we could actually process data in Europe and use that to reduce the cost of the vehicles? In fact, that's impossible compared to what they're doing in the United States, because we have these three burdensome regulations: GDPR, Data Act, and the AI Act. So this is a good example of, if the state takes a step back, if we relook at some of these damaging regulations, we can help the car industry out.
On this one, I'm sorry, again, I don't agree, because European people, they really appreciate digital transformation, but with some safeguards and some basic rules, notably the protection of their personal data. So exactly this can be a competitive advantage for a European electric vehicle if we build on a software which protects personal data. This can be a competitive distinction and advantage for European car makers.
And meanwhile, another interesting point I was reading is the UK has overtaken Germany as the most important market for electric cars.
It has. And Germany, you can see there are really where the source of the problems are. And especially as you were speaking about a social dialogue, one way where it is actually pretty needed is just to ease the tension surrounding electric vehicles as well. You can see a lot of genuine hate against it in Germany, for instance, because they feel like the electric vehicles and the mandates for them is killing their industrial regions.
It's very personal, isn't it? Don't touch my car, hands off my car. Well, we also wanted to bring in the perspective from the car industry to see, do they have any faith in this dialogue between the European Commission and the sector? So we caught up with the director of the European Automobile Manufacturing Association, also known as ACIA. It's Sigrid de Vries. Take a listen.
We would like to see action and not many more words, because we have a lot of targets, but there is also a lot of friction. Now these targets need to be implemented in reality, and here we see things not going very, very well. We need to do a transformation towards green mobility in a very short amount of time, that we have put the vehicles on the market, so we've done our job. But at the moment, the market is lagging behind. So the burden is on the auto industry, not on any of the other actors. We need a reality check for the way decarbonization is set up. This is a distinguishing factor from the US or China, where things are more simple, and Europe needs to indeed get its act together on its core issue of regulation. Cut red tape is a very important item indeed.
So that's the director of ACIA, Sigrid de Vries, reacting to the proposals this week from the Commission and the beginning of this strategic dialogue. So she talks about the need for a reality check, but But it's hard, isn't it, to find that compromise?
No, for sure. Like the whole EU agenda for years has been mainly imposing new regulations. So what do you do then when the main demand, at least from industry, is to cut regulations? Of course, it's been that for a while, but yeah.
And she talks about things being simpler in China and, of course, the US, where there's no focus really on reaching environmental targets like there has been here.
Yeah, this is a big shift now. All of a sudden, so the American Green Deal is being phased out in many, many areas, including car industry. And I think that for us is an opportunity because we can put our EVs in the larger plan for green transition. EVs should be part of a larger green mobility system where citizens are offered different possibilities, not only cars, can be public transportation, collective transportation, can be bikes, can be...
Sounds idyllic, but how to get there to this utopia?
But what would be really important is that people know that if they need a car close to their homes, they can use, they have it, which means to have this infrastructure. But if they don't need a car, they can go to another thing. So we need to have a larger creative plan for mobility, green mobility in Europe. And this can create a lot of interesting jobs.
And you talked about the American Green Deal being phased out, but there's a feeling in this town this week that the EU Green Deal is also being phased out, beginning with, of course, this competitive compass, as it's called, that was presented this Wednesday by the European Commission President von der Leyen. The plan is to simplify the regulatory environment, better coordinate policies at EU and national level, and reduce our dependencies on unreliable partners to make sure we are more secure. It feels like here, obviously they're listening to the business and to industry, but it feels like we're also rolling back on a pile of legislation and financial reporting that companies would have been obliged to do under the Green Deal. What is your reaction to that, Farg?
To start with, this call for cutting red tape is sort of one of the EU eternity projects. We've been talking about this forever and it never seems to happen. So one aspect is to see if it actually will result in something real this time. And as you say, the only proposal they made so far is to cut or scale back very recent regulations on financial and climate reporting by businesses. So it is really,
this is the
sharp
Corporate
turn.
Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. We've had many discussions about it here on Brussels, My Love, and we're hearing now it could indeed be rolled back on. But obviously cutting red tape for you is music to your ears.
Absolutely, and this CS3D, it's the worst regulation in the history of regulations, I think. These financial reporting directives have cost businesses millions and millions and millions, and they are part of the reason that we are so uncompetitive. You are completely right. Let's believe the Commission when we see the deregulation on the table, but they have to deliver, because at the moment this is throttling the industry. And you go to the investment firms and they're not even using the data that we're forced to report.
But industry have been spending a lot of money as well informing themselves on what this will mean and preparing for these steps. Yeah, so now if everything's rolled back, it's creating this confused environment.
It's a subsidy for the big four consultancies. You know, we just throw millions and millions at them and they'll tell us
what to do. It's like we're taking one step forward, two steps back. It's just, but obviously Business Europe, who have a big stake as well, they put out their own plan this week. 68 proposals to reduce the regulatory burden, and most focus was, of course, the environmental laws from the EU, things like tackling waste, product safety. So it feels like we're putting all that to the side. Greens, of course, will be reacting, criticising a lot, but they're, of course, not doing very well politically.
Look, I think we need to make a difference here between... it is true that sometimes we have too much regulatory burden. So somehow we need to find a way to simplify this. And perhaps AI can help to do this. So I'm just launching the idea. But on the other hand, sometimes we do need rules to ensure basic environmental and social quality. So these are standards making part of our European model. And so what is missing now, from my viewpoint, is that Europe is setting these basic standards, sometimes is leading in the world with these basic standards, which can bring a new quality of life and a new competitive advantage. But what is missing is our capacity to be really competitive in these areas. So in the green solutions, in digital solutions. So that's why innovation for me is the key word. And by the way, innovation is also at the top of the competitiveness compass, should be really at the top, because this is about providing better products, better services to make our life more sustainable. So here, Europe can take the competitive lead in the world.
And of course, the reason Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President, was presenting this is because she's been under a lot of pressure from business, also from capitals. We've seen France and Germany in the last couple of months calling for a reduction of the regulatory burden. And also we need to counter the shocks of potential what could happen in President Trump's administration, which could also hit us hard here in the EU.
Yeah, there's really been a feeling that things are falling apart for the last half year, and I think this competitiveness compass really reflects that. There are a lot of new acts, strategies and different policies that are aimed at tackling key areas. For instance, they mentioned the auto industry, but there is a short supply of actual stuff there.
And does this compass give us confidence that we're in safe hands here?
No, let's believe it when we see it. The compass is like a strategy, or, you know, it's kind of a roadmap over the next 5 years. But 5 years? Think about what Trump's doing in America. If you like him or you hate him, he is going to boom America's economy. I think very few people disagree with that. And so after 5 years of more, let's talk about it, let's have a strategic dialogue, let's do a compass, we're going to be poor. Already, European citizens, I could do the same job in America for double the salary and half the taxes. Why should I stay here? And many Europeans are thinking that. And after 5 more years of this, what are they going to be thinking?
But look, wait a moment. Now that Trump's agenda is clear, I think we should also come with a clear European response. And for me, first of all, is we need to prevent a tariffs war, because this will be lose-lose. This is first. Second, we need to move faster with our Green Deal, because they are phasing out, so this is opportunity for us. Third,
and just to inform our viewers, there was a call between Brussels and DC this week between the Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas and Mario Rubio, the Secretary of State. But on that very interesting point, we will conclude this conversation. But stay with us, though, because after the break, we'll be telling you why the price of coffee in a European city is going up, even though inflation is going down. See you soon on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, My Love, our weekly politics show with me, Maeve McMahon. Well, February is here, which means Germans will be heading to the polls in a couple of weeks. On their minds, their wallets. Amidst headlines, the German economy is set to contract again this year. But elsewhere, across the Eurozone, economists insist that growth is back, especially in Spain, which used to be known as a laggard. Meanwhile, figures insist that inflation is going down, but it seems that prices are not, begging the question, do we still have a cost of living crisis in the EU, or is it just a perception? Conor, in the previous segment you were talking about the fact that we are poor. So are there any signs of light, of being brighter this year in 2025, or absolutely not?
Absolutely not. And you mentioned inflation's going down, okay, but it doesn't mean that prices go down. Inflation, you know, that the prices will stay the same because they've increased so much. No, the issue is it has been very, very bad policy making, and that has driven economic decline in Europe. So if you look at our citizens, here in Brussels, we pay 50% tax rate. For what?
It's worth pointing out that we are seeing the prices have just gone through the roof. Milk and butter, for example, have increased by 43%, rice by 48%. It feels like we will just be spending and spending and spending. And where are we going to get the money?
No, it's tough to tell. And as Conor says, prices are sticky. So when they go up, they seldom come down. And we know, for instance, in some sectors like dairy, there have been producers taking a surcharge over the inflation increase. So there's an aspect of that as well.
We've seen as well this phenomenon of greedflation, where companies are exploiting inflation to justify their price hikes.
Yeah, sometimes this happens because I think we need to understand that if you really want to control the cost of living crisis, the ECB action on interest rates is not enough, because
that's the European Central Bank.
So we need to go to each supply chain to see the situation in food, in energy, in housing, and to tackle the specific reasons behind the prices out of control. And on the top of this, the access to good public services is very important. And there is the other part, which is to do with wages, because we need to keep people with access to living wages. And the fact that we could adopt a minimum wage law, this helps, but this is not enough. So we need to update wages also.
And at least we'll hear, at least in Belgium, we have the indexation, which means our wages do go up. based on inflation. That's something that's not happening in other countries, but still yet everyone's broke.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think you made a great point, Maria, but I have to ask, where is the money coming from? And let's highlight one member state, Italy. 10%, well, in 5 years, 10% of Italy's total tax revenue will go towards only servicing debt. That means that every year, Italians are paying more and more and more for the same amount. So we're really in a disastrous fiscal situation.
Belgium as well is broke.
Yes.
And still doesn't have a government because it's so broke it can't come to an agreement. So that is the fact of the matter. There's no more coffers in the...
No, and this is driving conflict around the world. We've seen every government in 2024 that was up for election, who has been in charge of the inflation rising, were booted out of office, more or less. So this is top of the mind in voters' heads.
Yeah, but we need to have a different way to deal with this bottleneck, because we need to have higher growth, quality growth, and for this we need to invest. Then people are asking, investing with which means? Well, national budgets, they do have a limit. So we need to complement this with a full mobilization of a capital markets union plus European budget, issuing debt on critical priorities. This is something which became top priority, because we have defense. We have the need to invest, we just saw in car industry and many other industries. And we cannot just argue that we don't have the money. No, the money is there.
And especially if you look at a country like Ireland, I mean, GDP figures are fantastic, but there's not a sufficient or adequate distribution of wealth, with not enough money being invested in services like education. But we did want to hear what it was like for people actually working in cafes and bars around our cities. So we caught up with Testa Shad, that's an NGO who monitors pricing for consumers. And we also paid a visit to Thomas Mertin. He works here in Brussels at the cosy Leopold Cafe. Take a listen.
The cost of raw materials alone has risen drastically, so we're increasing our prices according to the margins. Our coffees come from Brazil. It's a vicious circle. Labor cost, rent and charges. It's very, very difficult to make a living in our sector these days, with taxes everywhere.
We have seen rises of about 30% in general, and up to 70-80% over the last 3 years for certain product categories. So that is a lot, but that doesn't mean that our government cannot help. The government comes and helps people to bridge the gap. Also entrepreneurs, bar and restaurant owners, for example.
So there you go, something to think about the next time you enjoy your coffee. And not to mention the price of hiring staff as well. It's very expensive in Belgium. If you take as well Exki, a cafe where a few years ago here in the EU quarter, you could buy a coffee and a croissant for €2. Now it's almost €5 for a coffee, and they're on the verge of bankruptcy. So we do risk as well losing a lot of these cafes that brighten up our cities. Farg.
Yeah, we sure do. And as you said, it's a question of investments as well. Like, for instance, in Northern Europe, power prices are still very high. They're lower than they were just after the war in Ukraine started, but they're still very high. And it's a question of investing in key infrastructure, getting the power that is produced, for instance, in Spain to the Northern Europe. But there we don't have the will or the capacity right now to invest.
And just on power, there was a Eurostat recently that showed 1/5 of the EU population is not even able to heat their homes. Are we getting better in that field now? Are we more sufficient?
I don't think so. That's why we really need to have a European plan for housing. Because for the time being, in particular for young people in Europe, this is a major bottleneck we need to overcome. And the problem we have is that housing became a product in financial markets, a very interesting one. And this is bringing prices up and up. So we need to break this cycle.
And meanwhile, just a final question for Conor, who originally, of course, comes from the UK. It's still our neighbour, but it's on the brink of recession. We've seen bond yields higher than Greece's, the pound weakening very fast. Will we see the IMF intervene there to support your country?
I don't know about the IMF. It's entirely possible. But I think also we get very focused on the negatives. You are right to say it's not just the EU where these things are happening. It's all around the world. But let's look at the bright, shining light in the world, which is Argentina. Okay. With huge deregulation.
And on that note, we'll bring that conversation to an end. For more in-depth analysis, do check out Euronews.com. But for now, thank you so much to our panellists for being with us. And thank you so much for watching. Take care and see you soon on Euronews. Hi there and welcome to Brussels, my love, Euronews' weekly chat show. I'm Maeve McMahon and for this edition I'm joined by Fark Folkman, policy analyst with the European Policy Centre, Maria João Rodrigues, the president of the Foundation for the European Progressive Studies, FEPS, and Conor Allen, corporate lobbyist. And we're taking a look back at the news of the week. And one that caught our eye here was the fact that Brussels metro network was ranked as the second worst in Europe by the travel platform Bounce. Budapest was the worst. And meanwhile, data from the European Commission shows that the picture across Europe is rather varied when it comes to our satisfaction rate with public transport in our cities. In Vienna, residents are very satisfied at 91%, but in Rome, the level is very, very low. Brussels now doesn't fare too badly there. Does that data surprise you there?
A little bit in some way, because I'm pretty happy with the Brussels transportation system. But in principle, I think it should be free though. So that is
in
a big
Luxembourg.
ask. Yes.
In Luxembourg, it's free unless you want to go first class or travel cross border. It's free. But of course, we need a lot of money for that.
Yeah, this is perhaps too expensive, but I would say that, we need to offer green, cheaper public services and then to give the possibility to particular groups to have them for free. So this happens in many cities in Europe. I don't think we can have a universal rule, but this means that we need to have a big investment plan to move in this direction. So much
but
cheaper
we're not,
and green.
Maria, we're not, because in Brussels now the price has gone up for one metro ride. It's now $2.30 from February, whereas last September it was $2.20 and last January it was $2.10. So it's just gradually going up 10 cents every couple of months, Conor.
But that's indexation, right? That's inflation. It's not actually going up in real terms. But we shouldn't obsess over the price. I mean, 210, 220, it's not a big deal.
It's squeezing people's pockets.
Okay, but they're still using the public transport if they need to. A far bigger concern is that a lot of public transport networks across Europe are abandoned. And if you look at the Brussels metro, you see children stepping over passed out addicts. You see a lot of safety and security issues. I have female friends who won't go into the Brussels metro after dark. Okay, and these places have been abandoned. And what actually we need to do is improve the quality of these services, which will get more people into them, not make it free, which hasn't actually increased in Luxembourg usage rates.
And for that, of course, you need massive investment and you need, of course, as well, construction works. But we wanted to also bring in the voices of the people of Brussels. We've heard from our panellists how they feel about public transport here in the city. But let's take a listen to people across the city.
I use public transport a lot. In the center of Brussels, it's perfect. But if you live a little further out, with all the construction work they're doing for buses and trams, it's actually more convenient to take the car, even if it's not as environmentally friendly.
I'm a bit concerned because of not the quality, but rather the security issues.
C'est catastrophique.
It's catastrophic. It's not at all up to the standard of what public transport should be in the capital of Europe. There's a problem with regularity and cleanliness.
I think it could be better and also free, because it's really expensive right now and not a lot of people can afford it.
It's too crowded, I don't like it. I do a bit of sport like this.
So an array of views there from commuters here in Brussels. You said earlier you were very satisfied with the public transport. Conor Allen said he was not with the metro here. What would be your reaction to what you've seen there?
I think I agree with the last one. It's working pretty well. I agree with Conor in the way that it's not very clean at the stations, and it is a little bit grimy sometimes. But the main problem for me is just the sheer amount of cars in Brussels. In my opinion, that is what's causing delays and troubles for the public transport. And
the pollution has been shocking, of course, due to the cold weather. In January, we've seen temperatures hovering around freezing and rising air pollution levels in Brussels caused by emissions from heating buildings and also traffic. That's a major issue for our health.
And that's why we really think about the mobility system with a different range of possibilities, greener and cheaper. So the car is something which should not be for everyone, just to have, is for everyone to use if this is really needed. We need to shape also our way to deal with
But Conor, the issue now, of course, as well, is that it's winter. So you've seen a lot of people taking residence inside our metro stations. Back in summer, it wasn't like that. STIB invested a lot of money with the government in order to clean up the stations, which they did successfully. There was days there where you saw cleaners in the metro stations and they were spotless. But now, of course, winter, the problem's back, which shows a more structural problem that we have to deal with homelessness here and poverty.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, you have sort of these initiatives around creating drug usage centres in some of the most heavily trafficked metro stations in Brussels. How does that make people safer? But I'll just go back to what Maria said, that a car isn't for everybody. And that is not for the state to decide.
For everybody to have.
Let people decide whatever transport works for them. We're going to have electric cars anyway, so we're going to solve all the pollution problems.
But here, it's not the people who've been deciding, it was their employers, because of the subsidies as well given to a lot of people due to the high taxes. Many here in Belgium have just been handed a car, even though they didn't want it. And that's why we're clogging up our streets as many people commute and they don't pay their taxes. They just, they have their car and they pollute our streets.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying. A car can be there to be owned, to be rented, or to be used. So we need to change our approach for this. But I think this is right. Everyone who needs to have a car should have access to a car, but can be rented or used, not necessarily owned. So we also need to change our consumptions patterns, and this will help to have a more, let's say, future-proofed mobility system in our cities.
I mean, in some way I agree, and in some way, if you mentioned the car subsidies, what a disaster. On the one hand, we're passing environmental measures, and on the other hand, we're giving people free cars. Free cars!
We've created these mountains of problems over decades that now we're trying to undo. Any tips we can get perhaps from Oslo?
The prices are going up in Oslo as well, actually. But in Stavanger in Norway, they made buses free for a while. And you saw that when the buses were free, people would come. That is also a place where people usually drive because the distances are pretty long. But when it's
and I've seen in France, in cities like Strasbourg, Marseille, Paris, when pollution levels are very high, people can take the tram for free and the bus.
And this is also an area where we can make the Chinese work for us. They produce subsidized electric buses and trams, which they sell pretty cheaply in Europe. So let's take advantage of it.
Let's take advantage of it. On that positive note, we can bring this conversation to an end. Thank you so much, Fark Waldman from the European Policy Centre, Maria João Rodrigues from FEPS, and Conor Allen. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for watching. If you have any reactions to anything you have heard today, do reach out to us. BrusselsMyLove@Euronews.com. That's our email address. You can also reach us on social media. Thanks so much for tuning in. Take care and see you soon.